He's holding a pack of playing cards, and on the playing cards, on the front of them are all pictures of this woman in she's naked in various sexual positions, and he's all excited showing Neil these playing cards. And then he's like, oh yeah, look at this. And this woman she was here because she was pitching me on a pornographic evangelical television program. And Neil's just like, what the hell is going on here? And then they started on with their conversation, but Neil was telling me about this, and he goes, I realized later the woman was Stormy Daniels. Like, it was just this crazy story that goes to like how batshit Donald Trump's life was during these period, during that period in particular, but kind of all the time.
All right, we are back with Susanne Craig, investigative reporter at the New York Times. She's co-author of the brand new book, Lucky Loser, How Donald Trump Squandered His Father's Fortune and Created the Illusion of Success. Hey, Susanne, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
You've been working on this thing for a while. I was paging through it yesterday, and man, this is not one of those Donald Trump books. It's like Orange Man Bad, which he is, 200 pages and we're out. Like, this is deep research about his finances. And so I just kind of want to, hear from you kind of the origin story, why you felt like this was sort of worth the effort to really dig through his financials over the course of decades.
Right. I should have started by saying I'm a bit tired because I've been at this for coming on, I think, 10 years now. Yeah. This all started... the thing I love about reporting, and maybe I hate it some days, we talk about that, but you wake up in the morning, you don't really know what you're going to do. Something happens and you're sort of dispatched to it. And what happened to me in 2015 and what got both myself and Russ Buettner, my colleague who wrote the book with me, is Donald Trump, was running for president. Nobody at that point suspected he would stay in the race, but he was in early 2016, was having some success in early 2016 in the primaries. And
I remember
I got the call from the boss saying, hey, he could be out in a couple months, but we'd like you to come back. I was running the City Hall Bureau for the Times. I had just started. And can you do one big story, kind of looking at what he owns in New York, what he doesn't own, his name's on buildings, and people didn't know if he owned that, and sort of what sort of player is he in New York? So I said, sure. And I did that story. And then Donald Trump kept winning. And I never went back to City Hall, and I'm still writing about the guy. So that's like 9 years of crazy town. And same thing happened to Russ. Yeah. And the reason it's important, back then, I just put people back then. Yeah. He started by saying, I'm going to release my tax returns. And that was important because he's got a complicated business empire. He was running for president, and people want to know what influences are on the guy. Who's pulling the strings behind the curtain, and what do his finances look like? So he had said he was going to release his tax returns. Well, big surprise, he lied about that. He didn't release his tax returns. And in 2016, there was, in particular, there was just a massive search on for a lot of things about Donald Trump because he came from nowhere in politics to running for president. So much was not known about him. But my corner of the world, and it was a big one, was his finances. And everybody was looking for his tax returns. We were tearing through courthouses and anywhere you can imagine, regulatory filings. And then I had an incredible thing happen to me in September of 2016, which was I went to my mailbox one afternoon, Friday afternoon, and there was I love mail, and so I was excited.
I hate mail.
I love it.
This story is inspiring me because I hate going in my mailbox. There's always bills, tickets,
right.
Camera tickets,
magazines you don't want to read, but I always check it. I don't know, it's just a thing. And there was a manila envelope addressed to me, and I opened it, and inside was what looked like, we weren't sure, 3 pages of Donald Trump's 1995 tax returns. And I was like, well, this is great if it's true. And it looked, we looked at the tax return, and what was shocking about it was $1 billion in accumulated losses for 1995. Like, this successful billionaire guy who was running on that. In 1995, his losses had looked like they did, if it was true, had clocked $1 billion. And it was true. We confirmed the tax return, took us working round the clock for 10 days. but we got that to press. And that was kind of the first big, I think, was the first big story about anybody had got about his taxes. And that sort of set us on a journey for the next however many years, where we did a lot more on Fred Trump and what he inherited from his father, how he enhanced it with tax fraud. This was cool. Great story. And we were lucky enough to have won a Pulitzer with that. And then we got 20 plus years of his corporate and personal tax returns in 2020. All of that gave us this incredible, I think, skeleton for a story. But Russ and I, we wanted to tell the sweeping narrative that we saw in those numbers, a story about family and power struggles, and about Donald's business career, about how he was born into this fortune, got another fortune from Mark Burnett for hosting The Apprentice, and how that was structured, and then how the loser in him, he put all of that money, he invested it in himself, and that he invested it in businesses that he didn't run very well, and we could see through his taxes, most of them lost money.
Yeah, so I was a liberal arts major. My dad wanted me to go to business school,
same.
and I didn't listen to him. Okay. How do you lose $900 million in a year and also have a plane? Like, can you explain to me how he was structuring this? Like, how did it?
Yeah,
even work?
No, he those were accumulated losses. His casinos were losing huge amounts of money, but he was also borrowing money, and he, the banks were willing to loan him money, and they kept doing it. And part of the magic of the casinos, it was structured within a public corporation, but he would buy the accoutrements of wealth. It's a really good observation. And he looked wealthy, and the banks kept betting on him. He bought like planes and yachts. This is how he got on like Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. Like they loved it because he had all these toys that they could film. And then it all came crashing down at one point. And then he sold The Apprentice on this, that he'd come back from this wreckage.
So talk about that period, because that's what I don't quite understand, right? Like, I get the Apprentice money, but after the failures, after the bankruptcies, I guess he has his story, right? Which is whatever, rebuilding, comeback, right. Famous man. Like, what does the numbers show? Like, how did he live his lifestyle in the bankruptcy period? In that period, well, he was structured. He was sort of almost too big to fail, so there was sort of a structured plan for him coming out of that. And then he actually, it's interesting, that period before The Apprentice, he kept up the appearances, and there was a lot of big talk, but he wasn't. He was sort of doing pretty stagnant at that point. He was building a couple projects, included he started the tower in Chicago that he built. That was his last construction project. That wasn't doing well. And he, in 2003-4 era, he structured or engineered the sale of his father's empire. His father died in 1999. Fred wanted to keep that in the family, but Donald convinced his siblings to sell. And he got, almost $200 million from that. I think around $177 million from that. He always is lucky. It's a apt title. He found a wellspring of money, but he was trying to get, what was interesting about that period that Russ and I found is he was trying to get licensing deals during that period and other things to bring in cash, because he still had, the Trump name. It was all over the buildings. There was a value he saw in that. And he was really having trouble. He was not cutting deals at all on the licensing side. And then The Apprentice came around, and it turned everything around. Fucking Mark Burnett. Oh, shakes my fist.
And that, how Mark structured that, it still is one of the craziest things that we found once we got into the reporting on this. Because you think TV host, right? Like, how much could a TV host make? He was being paid $50,000 an episode. Like, this is good money, but it's not like life-changing magic money. But what happened, which was incredible, and we were able to get not only his taxes through the reporting in the book, I got a lot of the financials of the actual television show. Okay. And what Mark did, which was incredible, let me premise that, for Donald Trump and for Mark Burnett. They both made a huge amount of money out of it. NBC was so keen to lock not Donald Trump down, but Mark Burnett down on The Apprentice, because he was red hot at that point, coming off of Survivor, the reality TV show that was just a monster hit. And NBC really wanted to get into the reality TV space. So Jeff Zucker was involved. He goes on to be the head of CNN and you know, another big figure in Donald Trump's life. He, at that point, signed an agreement with Mark Burnett on The Apprentice, where NBC would retain the money from the commercials, which is really good money. But Mark Burnett would get the product placement money. And what that means is, you know, on Survivor, if there was a competition between the two teams and they were fighting over a bag of Doritos, they would pay. Doritos would pay, or whoever owns Doritos, the potato chip maker. And Mark Burnett would keep that money. So at that point, that meant something. But NBC was willing to let it go because they didn't see it as sort of this, you know, big money maker. And then The Apprentice comes on. The first year, pretty much, there wasn't a lot of product placement. They had, you know, a NetJets type, Marquee Jets came on, and they got some advertising, but they just agreed to fly the contestants from the show somewhere. It wasn't like they were paying a lot to be on the show. But after the first year, Madison Avenue loved the show, and all of a sudden, all these corporations are clamoring to get on the show because it's essentially a 45 minute ad for their product. Like if a toothpaste company comes on and the two teams are battling to create an ad campaign for the toothpaste company, that's 45 minutes. That's an advertisement for the toothpaste company. And we saw the second, third, fourth season, companies were paying up to $4 million, $4 or $5 million to be on the show. And Mark Burnett agreed to give half of the product placement money to Donald Trump. So he got a check every time for half of whatever that company was paying. Mark Burnett was sitting over there creating TV magic, including rehabilitating Donald Trump's image. And Donald Trump was the host. So he didn't have anything to do with that. He would show up for the boardroom scene, if you've seen the show, meet the contestants, and walk away with half of all the product placement money. And then he got licensing deals off of it, right? With all these companies. Like he was separately doing a ton of licensing deals.
Yeah. While you mentioned Survivor, I should mention, you know, some breaking Survivor news that might be of interest to some of our audience. Fellow podcast host John Lovett lost in the very first episode of Survivor on last night's show. Tough break to John Lovett. Happy trails to you, but glad you're back in the podcast game. We love him. I just had
thanks
to
for that,
John. You mentioned Survivor, and so I was like, oh, I feel like we need to tease John a little bit.
I love it.
It was a good try. One episode's pretty good. Hey, y'all, there was a period where at the end of a work day, I'd get home, we'd split a bottle of wine, or maybe I'd have a bourbon. But, you know, the result of that is a little bit of sluggishness. And especially as you get into your 40s, the result is sluggishness. And that's why maybe after a stressful day of streaming Donald Trump rallies, the best answer is Sol's new out-of-office THC gummies, perfectly microdosed to get you blissed, not blitzed. This podcast is sponsored by Sol. Sol's new out-of-office gummies are perfectly microdosed with hemp-derived THC and CBD to give any day that chilling on the beach vibe. Until recently, I didn't know you could buy THC products online like this. And I bet you didn't know you can now buy hemp-derived THC products in all 50 states. How can Sol send you THC products no matter where in the U.S. you live? Because of the 2018 Farm Bill, hemp-derived THC is now legal and accessible nationwide. The out-of-office gummies help you get that much-needed me time at the end of the day. They are convenient and delicious. I was trying to sell Bill Crystal on having one of these while he watches slow horses in the evening. I haven't made the sale yet, but I have other people in my life that have been using the microdosed gummies after work to avoid the hangover, or to help them go to sleep. And I've been receiving positive feedback on that. Sol was founded 5 years ago by a brother and sister duo, Mike and Angie Lee. Mike is a former world-ranked professional boxer, and Angie is an author and professional speaker. They had the desire to create natural alternatives to medication that tackle problems they deal with themselves, like sleeplessness, anxiety, focus, and pain. And Soul's products are grown right here in the USA, organically farmed. So give Soul a try. Head to getsoul.com and use code TheBulwark for 30% off your order. That's 30% off your order using code TheBulwark. One last time, getsoul.com and code TheBulwark for 30% off. So the Mark Burnett is kind of the second inheritance that Donald Trump gets.
Yeah.
Kind of a second daddy figure. The first one was a point of contention at the debate, and so I want to play what Kamala Harris and Donald Trump said at the debate about his inheritance, and then have you, since you've actually seen the data, be our podcast fact checker. Let's listen.
The values I bring to the importance of home ownership, knowing not everybody got handed $400 million on a silver platter and then filed bankruptcy 6 times.
President Trump, your
Well,
response?
first of all, I wasn't given $400 million. I wish I was. My father was a Brooklyn builder, Brooklyn, Queens, and a great father, and I learned a lot from him. But I was given a fraction of that, a tiny fraction, and I built it into many, many billions of dollars, many, many billions. And when people see it, they are even surprised. So we don't have to talk about that.
All right, Susanne. What is the truth of this? This is something that he's been saying. He just gets a little bit of help, and he's been saying this for years now. And then she drops the 400 million figure, which is, I guess, is what matches what your reporting showed. So talk to us about how you came to that figure.
Right, and we did a lot of work to get to that figure. It was in that 2018 story that I mentioned. We were able to get to that figure because, as part of the reporting for that story, Mary Trump, who is Donald Trump's niece,
Sure.
Provided us with more than 100,000 pages of documents that gave just opened up a door that we never thought we would ever get into Fred Trump's wealth. And she had all this information. It's interesting, when we started on that story, and we wanted to understand more about Fred Trump when we started on that story that ran in 2018. It ultimately showed he inherited hundreds of millions of dollars, and it was enhanced through tax fraud. But it started with a simple question: we knew who Fred Trump was, but we really didn't. And Donald Trump had been saying he was some kind of Mickey Mouse outer borough builder for a long time. He said it was a small builder, and he inherited $1 million. And we just started looking first into the property records in New York City just to understand what he owned. It's great. There's a system, it's a public system, and you can put in someone's name and see what they owned. And we started just basically to build a map of everything. And in doing that, Mary Trump's name and her brother's name, a lot of other names came up, and we just started building a big source list. But Mary Trump and Fred Trump, her brother, had owned some of the properties that we were bumping up against. So one day, and we realized, and it had been written about, she was in litigation with Donald Trump at one point, and it was over her grandfather's estate. Right. We knew, importantly, that litigation had gone to discovery, and discovery is like kind of the magic reporter word. So we knew, we knew there was something there. We thought there would be some records. We didn't really know how much. We'd done some digging around, and I just decided one day it was important enough. We didn't want to call. I wanted to go to her door. And she was pretty apprehensive at first about talking to me, but we kind of kept an open line, and eventually she sat down with me and she said, I have really not any idea what's in the litigation, but the boxes should still be over at the lawyer's office that I hired. Why don't I call him and I'll go and get everything for you? And the short of it is she did. She went and rented a van, and it was great. Yeah. And she loaded it up and came back to her house. And I met her there with my colleagues who were working on the story. And we transported all of the information to kind of this secret locked room at the New York Times, and starting digging through it all. It took us a year or more to get through it, but we saw through that.
Did you have good snacks in that room, or was the temperature control?
We
good,
did.
or?
We had some scotch, and we didn't even let the cleaners in, so we had to clean it, but that was fine. We were, we sort of had some rules, but it took us a long time.
It's kind of a reality show of its own,
It could have been,
it's like a Big Brother situation. You guys, the reporters in a room with Donald Trump's tax. And so the short of it, then you get to the 400 million. It's just this combo of the buildings. So it's not all cash, right? It's like the buildings, and then some of what Mary and Fred, we had Fred Jr. on the pod, sort of what they got kind of schemed out of. and that is really what is where the number comes from.
Right, and we can see how much it was worth because he sold it a few years later, and then some of this becomes public record, so you sort of can see how much he got,
right,
through it all. But we were able to trace it through the documents, through other public records, and put it all together. And his claim that he got a small loan, I think he's come to believe it, and he just keeps repeating it. And it was an even bigger deal.
Was it true at the beginning? Is it one of those things where it was like at the very beginning it was kind of true, and then his dad, not really?
Yeah, well, he got some loans from his dad. Some of them he didn't pay back, but that $1 million loan, we actually looked into it, and it never existed. Like, he got loans. Some of them, like I said, weren't paid back. But no, I mean, he got a ton of money, and he's still
it's a George Costanza situation. Like, if you believe it, it becomes true type of thing.
Right, that's Donald Trump's magic, right? A lie repeated over and over, he hopes becomes fact. And he's still, Starrett City is the public housing project that Fred Trump owned a piece of. That recently paid out money for Donald Trump. He continues to get money from the smart investments his father made. Like, it's still going on. There's no small time builder here. There's no, I just got a small loan and it was all me. Donald Trump, he got so much money from his father, but he also got contacts from his father. His father co-signed loans for him. What drives me crazy about it is, why don't just acknowledge that your dad was a great builder? Like, yeah, right. I don't know, just like let it go, man.
It has to be him.
Right.
No, it's all got to be him. Megalomania. You also got into a little bit of the Stormy and some of the finances around that. What have you found out about the Stormy situation?
We did. Actually, it was fun. It wasn't actually anything financial, but we called a ton of people, and came from an unexpected source. I was talking to a fellow over in the UK. He was his name's Neil Hobday. He was a great guy, and he had been involved in the project management of some of the golf courses that Donald Trump has built overseas. So most of his interaction with Donald Trump was overseas, but occasionally he'd come to HQ in New York to visit the Trump Tower and see Alan Weiselberg and Donald Trump. Sure. And he came one day, flew over in February of 2007, which we came to learn through Stormy Daniels' book and through the trial that just happened, that Stormy Daniels was at Trump Tower at that time. So he comes in for a meeting, and he's walking in to see Donald Trump, and there's this blonde-haired, kind of very well-endowed woman in the office talking to Donald Trump. He doesn't know who it is, but he comes into the office, says hello to the woman, and she says goodbye and sort of leaves, and Donald Trump's all excited, and he's like, "You're not," and he's holding a pack of playing cards, and on the playing cards, on the front of them, are all pictures of this woman she's naked in various sexual positions, and he's all excited showing Neil these playing cards. And then he's like, "Oh yeah, look at this." And this woman she was here because she was pitching me on a pornographic evangelical television program. And Neil's just like, what the hell is going on here? And then they started on with their conversation. But Neil was telling me about this, and he goes, "I realized later the woman was Stormy Daniels." And then we got a hold of Stormy Daniels, and she's like, "I totally remember that. And I remember the playing cards, and I gave them to Donald." Like, it was just this crazy story that goes to like how batshit Donald Trump's life was during this period, during that period in particular, but kind of all the time.
You laugh, and in 2007, that seems like a ridiculous pitch, a pornographic evangelical television show. It feels like a contradiction in terms. But now, in 2024, they were ahead of the game, maybe. I bet that would have crushed. I don't know. It seems like evangelicism is more of like a lifestyle brand now, And so you can add a little pornography on top of it if you're going to have Trump.
It sounds less crazy today, right? Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
What else? Anything else? I mean, you're so deep. You spent a year there. You're going through all this stuff. I mean, there had to be other little fun. Like, do you have any other favorite kind of anecdotes, favorite little factoids about the Trump, the Trump business that jumped out at you?
There's one that it's sort of, I really like it. It's an Apprentice anecdote, and it's it just sort of goes to Donald Trump and the ego that he developed during this period. And just to premise that, this is another story I'm about before I tell the main story, but even during the filming of The Apprentice, how you put an X where people are supposed to stand when you're on a TV set. He would insist that there was a tea. We actually have photos of this. Somebody
Oh
on the show showed us because they kept it because it was so crazy. So one of the stories that we heard so many stories from. I phoned all the marketing officers that from every company that appeared on the show to talk to them about their interactions with Donald Trump, because some of them were insulted on air by him. And I was just like, these guys have got to just have great stories. And nobody called them. So it was great. And one of the ones was, so QVC is the shopping network, and they did an episode on The Apprentice. And then after this, because Donald Trump's always cutting side deals, he got a deal where he could come out to QVC to sell whatever his latest book was at the time. And so he has to go out to QVC to their campus in Pennsylvania. And normally when celebrities come in, because a lot of celebrities go out there to hawk stuff, they fly into Brandywine Airport. Well, Donald Trump didn't want to do that. So the chief marketing officer and the people from Mark Burnett's show, they agreed to create some makeshift helicopter landing pad in the big field that's at QVC. And so they go out there that day and they're waiting for Donald Trump to come, and they see the helicopter and it's descending down and it's about to land, not far from where it's supposed to land. And all of a sudden it redirects and it lands in the middle of the employee parking lot, and stones go flying everywhere. They hit cars. There was insurance claims filed because of this. And he lands, he gets out, and Dan Gill, one of the people who was working for Mark Burnett, looks at Donald Trump's bodyguard, Keith Schiller, and says, "Keith, what just happened?" They were furious. There's a lot of words I don't want to repeat that were said. And Keith says,
sure then Donald Trump covered everybody, paid for all of the the cars and everything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He was very concerned, and the comment came back: Donald Trump didn't want to get his shoes muddy, so he just landed in the employee parking lot. Yeah.
What a trash person. There's so much there. There's so much in the book. You can kind of it's a narrative. You can do the beginning to the end. You can also just page through it and just like read these crazy anecdotes like this from the various phases of his life of losing and debauchery and bankruptcy. So the book is Lucky Loser. Hopefully 2 months from now, we have the loser and not the luck, and hopefully the luck is ours. But we'll see how it goes. Susanne Craig, thanks so much for coming on the Bulwark podcast. We'll see you around 30 Rock soon, I'm sure, and we'll do it again soon. Appreciate all the work you put in on this. All right, everybody else, we'll be back tomorrow for the Friday weekend edition of the Bulwark podcast. We'll see you all then. Peace.